So, in the middle of the 1880s, Bismarck had created a situation where Germany seemed set to dominate Europe peacefully for the foreseeable future, and that France was diplomatically isolated. But a change at the top in Germany ultimately served to not only unravel Bismarck's plans, but perhaps propel the entire continent towards war in the second decade of the 20th century. That change came in 1888. So, Kaiser William I died in 1888. The crown passed to his son, Friedrich III, who actually already had cancer, so he only lived 99 days before the crown passed to Friedrich's son, William's grandson, William II. And he had a very different attitude towards Germany's position in Europe from Bismarck. Bismarck, as I explained in the earlier video, felt that ultimately Germany had achieved the level of dominance it wanted, and it wasn't possible for Germany to really kind of expand, or at least wasn't a good idea for Germany to try and expand its power and influence any more than it already had. Kaiser William, however, felt differently. He was the grandson of Queen Victoria, so he had this very kind of jealous attitude towards Britain or the United Kingdom, that he wanted Germany to be like the United Kingdom, and it was an international power, not just a European power. In particular, he wanted Germany to adopt a great navy. I mean, Prussia historically didn't really have a navy at all. Germany did not have much of a navy prior to the 1890s, but Kaiser William II believed that it was important that Germany acquired a navy because he could use this navy to get colonies. So William, again, because of his relationship with the British royal family, because of his interest in the British royal family, very much wanted to copy Britain in every way it could. And this kind of clashed with what Bismarck wanted. For Bismarck, Germany was a continental land power in Europe. It shouldn't really get involved in affairs outside of Europe, which was obviously the opposite of what William was looking for. So the two clashed, and in 1890, William forced Bismarck to resign. So Bismarck was obviously pretty old at this stage. You can see the picture here of Kaiser William, the younger man, and Bismarck on the right. Obviously, you can see his age in that picture. They clashed not just over colonies, although that was a big issue between them. Bismarck claimed that all the colonies in the world weren't worth the bones of one good Pomeranian musket man. That he just felt that basically interest in colonies was not, trying to acquire colonies was simply not in Germany's best interests. And they also clashed over socialism. Bismarck, as you saw, was originally hired to try and weaken liberals and socialists in the German parliament. Kaiser William, however, didn't want to kind of crush socialism in the same way. He wanted to be kind of a part of Kaiser William's problem was that he wanted to be liked by a lot of people. He knew that socialist policies were pretty popular in Germany, so he didn't want to kind of crush the Socialist Party in the way that Bismarck did, and ultimately he dismissed Bismarck in 1890. So Bismarck had carefully set up Germany to be the dominant power in Europe with limited goals, and by those limited goals I mean not really expanding beyond any more territory than it already had, not fighting any more wars because they did not need to fight wars. Any more wars could only possibly lead to a reduction of German power and influence. And this is something he had skillfully done, as we've seen, over a number of decades, of carefully kind of firstly creating Germany itself, and then creating a situation where Germany had all the kind of diplomatic cards in terms of its rivalry with France. But William, as you're going to see, had little of Bismarck's diplomacy. And what he ends up doing is, not only, I mean, obviously France was never going to be Germany's friend anyway, but Kaiser William II creates situations where he increases tensions both with the United Kingdom and with Russia, and in some ways kind of encourages both powers to look to France as a potential ally, which obviously undermines everything that Bismarck had been working towards. So this is a famous picture here from a newspaper in 1890. It's called The Dropping of the Pilot. What we have here is Bismarck walking down the steps. The idea is he's no longer the captain of the ship. He's been kicked off the ship, heading for a lifeboat, and it's Kaiser William II looking on. So now William's in charge of the ship of the German state, and as you're going to see, he's going to take it in a very different direction. And some would argue that he ultimately takes it onto the rocks of the First World War. So a key turning point in the outbreak of the First World War is the rise of Kaiser William II to power in Germany, and his decision to kind of jettison Bismarck's policies and pursue a more independent, more aggressive foreign policy. So William and many German intellectuals were huge admirers of the British Empire, but as I say here, also jealous of it, that they wanted Germany to kind of emulate the British Empire. And in part, this was to do with what I mentioned in the earlier video, the rise of kind of ethnic nationalism. So in the late 19th century, we really get the sense of nationalism as a kind of, when I talked about nationalism in an earlier class, we mentioned how the initial vision of nationalism was something more of a civic nationalism, the sense being that as long as you supported the state, abided by its laws, participated in the political community, you were part of the nation. We get much more of an ethnic or racial sense of nationalism in the late 19th century. And one manifestation of that was the rise of Teutonism or Anglo-Saxonism. That is the belief that the Germanic people in particular had a special place in the world and essentially were superior culturally, militarily, politically, financially to the rest of the world. And for Anglo-Saxonists or Teutonists, the evidence of this was the growing power of the United States, the obvious power of the British Empire, and a sudden rise of Germany as a military and economic power as well. So basically they all felt that there was this kind of Germanic connection between these three nations, because England, the English nation originated from Germany. German invaders invaded Britain in the early 1st century AD, or the early 1st millennium AD. The United States obviously derived its ethnic origins originally from England as well. So that's how all these things were linked in this kind of sense of Germanic identity. So many in Germany admired the British Empire, saw them as natural allies, but also believed that Germany was capable of more. That if their Anglo-Saxon cousins in Britain could create a great empire, so could Germany. And this referred to the policy of Weltpolitik, world politics. Bismarck, or William wanted Germany, William II that is, wanted Germany to be a world power. So in the 21st century, if anything happens in any part of the world, the United States government almost uniquely will have a position on it. The United States government, or the United States really is the sole superpower in the world today. In the 19th century, this was also true of Britain, that Britain, if anything happened anywhere in the world, there was some kind of British influence or British interest in what was going on. And that's what William wanted for Germany as well. He wanted Germany to be a world power, so that's what Weltpolitik was about. It simply means world politics, and that Germany would be heavily connected with world affairs. And he also began encouraging Germany to build a navy for a couple of reasons. One was to discourage any potential British attack, or at least make the British wary of German naval power, and also to accelerate the acquisition of colonies for Germany. Obviously, if you want to acquire colonies, you have to sail overseas and conquer them, and if you want to do that, you have to have a navy. So the German government begins, starting in the 1890s, aggressively spending on military, naval spending. The man pictured here with the forked beard was Alfred von Tirpitz. He was the Secretary of State for the German Navy, and essentially controlled the German Navy, was responsible for the German Navy from 1890 to 1916, and perhaps more responsible than anyone else for dramatically increasing the size of the German Navy. In 1897, the German Reichstag, the German Parliament, passed a funding bill that dramatically increased the amount of money the German Navy was acquired. And von Tirpitz used that money to pump out an enormous quantity of powerful German warships. So very suddenly, Britain was faced with a situation where it traditionally had no real major naval rivals in Europe, apart from the French. But suddenly, Germany not only is becoming a rival, but potentially is threatening the dominance of the British Navy itself. The traditional British naval policy had been that the British Navy should be strong enough to defeat the next two largest navies in the world combined. And with the German naval build-up, it was becoming apparent that the Germans were aspiring to create a navy that was equal to the size, or almost equal to the size, of the British Navy. And that alarmed the British state in particular. Britain's diplomatic position in the late 19th century was one of what I think the term I used already was splendid isolation, that Britain did not want to get involved in continental alliances because it wanted to retain its independence and to stay kind of aloof from these ties. But with the rise of the German Navy, with Germany kind of clearly trying to edge in or nudge in on Britain's position as a dominant world power, they began to rethink that strategy. And so the policy of splendid isolation was kind of abandoned in the early 20th century, and the British began to look, especially to the French, their ancient enemy, as a potential ally. And that kind of shows you just how dramatic the change of policy was for the United Kingdom, because traditionally France was obviously their big rival, but now they see France as a potential ally in trying to curb this new growing world power in the shape of Germany.